Okay, this is a presentation or a movie on Fire of the United Nations Judicial Whores in Canada. And this is actually, I split it off of the Canada Border Pigs video because it was getting way too long. And, um, and so this is an effort to try and make it a little bit shorter. And hopefully this one's, not too long as well. I appreciate your patience listening to these and watching these, and I hope you get something out of them. PIG, the word PIG is an acronym. It stands for Persons in Government Who Intend to Breach the Trust and Perjure their Oath. Um, United Nations judicial whores are so-called judges who are actually not judges but are clerks operating for their agency and are bought and paid for under the Unidroit Treaty described herein. United Nations judicial whores have a kangaroo court that is prejudged under Roman civil law, and it doesn't matter what you say or do. United Nations judicial whores routinely deny due process. They're not interested in due process. They're interested in their kangaroo court and in their commercial transaction. This is a court case. Judges who become involved in enforcement of mere statutes, civil or criminal in nature and otherwise, act as mere clerks of the involved agency. And here's another one. It's the accepted rule, not only in state courts, but of the federal courts as well, that when a judge is enforcing administrative law, they're described as mere extensions of the administrative agency for superior reviewing purposes, as a ministerial clerk for an agency. Okay, so it's a kangaroo court. And there's lots more court cases that talk about this. I go through some of them in the presentation on um, um, bankrupt corporate governments, the bar members video, and the other ones. Anyways, these United Nations judicial whores are not competent to do justice, which they themselves call it the appearance of justice, which is a fraud as found in Corruption in the Courts number 4. These United Nations judicial whores are not neutral or unbiased, but are bought and paid for. It's a fundamental right of a party to have a neutral and detached judge preside over judicial proceedings, and these are actually not judicial proceedings. It's a kangaroo court, and there's nothing. They're not judges. They're clerks. They're just a bunch of thieves putting on the charade of a court. So they're masquerading as a judge, is what they're doing. And once you understand what's happening, they're just thieves. And with these Canada Border Pigs and their show trial, they even called it a summary proceeding. A summary proceeding is a non-jury proceeding, which tells you that it's a military dictatorship. There's no common law. There's no due process because there's no jury. And when I demanded a jury, they didn't. They did everything they could to deny it. It's a plenary action. If you notice there, a plenary action is a military dictatorship, um, and um, and the common law is wholly a stranger to summary proceedings. There's nothing to do with common law in there. They're nothing but a bunch of thieves, and that's taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. United Nations judicial whores are selling their justice in violation of the Magna Carta. To no one will we sell, to no one refuse or delay right or justice. The judicial whores refuse justice if you don't pay their extortion. The judicial whores delay their justice so they can collect more royalties. And they will go and create all sorts more hearings, and they want to have get in on the action. These judicial whores prejudge everything. Judicial whores have a kangaroo court. Kangaroo courts a self-appointed tribunal or mock court in which the principles of justice are disregarded, perverted, or parodied. A court or tribunal characterized by unauthorized or irregular procedures so as to render a fair proceeding impossible. It's not a court. It's a kangaroo court. They had nothing to do. There's nothing to do with justice going on in there. A sham legal proceeding. They don't want to have a jury see any of that stuff because they're not going to be able to railroad you then. And that's taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. I filed a petition of right in Lethbridge in November of 2010. I told the clerk that the Magna Carta says they're not supposed to be selling the justice. And actually, this was the chief clerk or the manager. And she says to me, she says, quote, "You'll get no justice here." And at the time I laughed, but she was 100% right. There's nothing to do with justice in there. They're just nothing but a bunch of thieves. And that was in the Queen's Bench, too. And that wasn't in the provincial court, in the provincial kangaroo court in Alberta. They're even worse. The petition of right was given case number, and the petition of right was filed against the Canada Border Services Agency pigs for their unlawful arrest and the city of Lethbridge pigs for their unlawful arrest, and with no probable cause, as described in a Canada Border Pigs video. There's in no case was there breach of peace. I have never in my life breached the peace, and but they don't care. They don't want to breach it. They intend to breach the peace themselves. They're just nothing but a bunch of thieves, and that's exactly what they do. Is they breach the peace, because an unlawful arrest is an assault, and an assault is a breach of the peace, and that's exactly what they do. And Langston, the judicial whore selling us justice, dismissed the case. I filed a notice of appeal, and the judicial whore in the Alberta Court of Appeals, this whore by the name of McDonald, selling his justice, refused to let it proceed unless I paid their extortion. And McDonald is named in this criminal complaint against the Alberta Court of Appeals, which is recorded with the Pinal County Recorder. Now, I would encourage anyone to go to the Pinal County Recorder's website, and you can look that up by that fee number, okay? You'll find any of these documents and look them up by the fee number, and you'll see that I've attached my evidence, and all the pages are sequentially numbered to tie them all together, and so that you can see what they look like. And I'm gonna make up another one for these whores and send them a copy. And after that, Langston, the whore, dismissed the case, I was continually harassed at the borders of Canada and the United States by both the Canada Border Pigs and the U.S. Border Pigs. I was unlawfully arrested by the U.S. Border Pigs on the 15th of February 2011, the 27th of February 2011, the 3rd of June 2011, on 11th of June 2011, 17th of June 2011, 8th of July 2011, 25th of September 2011, 16th of December 2011, and 3rd of January 2013, and then on the 1st of October 2013. The Canada Border Pigs assaulted me on on 11th of October, and they held their show trial in their Kangaroo United Nations so-called court in March of 2014, as described in the Canada Border Pigs video. These U.S. Border Pigs unlawfully arrested me on the 3rd of January on Interstate Highway 10, about 100 miles east of El Paso. I was well within the border, and they didn't say anything about it. They just they told me to get out and put my hand against the car, and I said, "Why am I being arrested?" And they actually started pulling out handcuffs, and they didn't tell me why. They didn't ask me who I was, nothing. And the pigs went, and I told them, they told me to go in the building, and I says, "No, I'm not going anywhere." And then they forcibly took me in the building and made me sit there until and then I demanded to see their boss. And so then they took me to this captain, and I demanded to know why I was being arrested. And he went and did some, took him about a half an hour, and then they said, "Well, you're free to go now." And so that's what these pigs do. And these are the U.S. Border Pigs, and so they're no different. They're all connected with the Canada Border Pigs, and it ain't over, pigs. I filed a lawsuit, the United Nations de facto Kangaroo U.S. District Court in the Northern District of Texas, and it was given a case number, and the judicial whore by the name of Cummings it was going to be the subject of the Fire the United Nations Judicial Whores in America video coming up. And so Cummings, if you're listening to this, it's coming. I filed a lawsuit in Texas in the 352nd District Court, and it's still open. This video presentation should be viewed in conjunction with the Canada Border Pigs video and the Corruption in the Courts 3 and 4 videos, the bar members video, and the peace officers video. This presentation is about judicial whores involved in their superiors that insist on representing me without authority to fabricate evidence that I'm one of their slaves so they can justify their imposition of Roman civil law, their denial of due process, their assaults, their kidnapping, and their false imprisonment. The revolutions have been fought over taxation without representation, the U.S. War of Independence, the English Civil War, and the Magna Carta, and more. There's lots of them, I'm sure, once a little bit of research is done, but these ones we know about. Revolutions, this is a Canadian citation that says that revolutions have been fought over taxation without representation. And this is a U.S. Supreme Court case. If it were true that according to the spirit of the Constitution, the power of taxation is limited by the right of representation, whence is derived the power to lay and collect duties, imposts, excises, And this is talking about the District of Columbia. If the principles of liberty of our Constitution forbid the raising of revenue from those who are not represented, do not those principles forbid the raising it by duties, imposts, excises, as well as by direct tax? That's the 4 kinds of tax. Anyways, so these thieves represent you without authority. This is a Supreme Court of Canada case. This principle of no taxation without representation is central to our conception of democracy and the rule of law. This principle of, and so that's the Supreme Court of Canada. So they forcibly represent you whether you like it or not. This is how the CRA thieves justify their thefts. This is how the IRS thieves justify their thefts. This is how the customs thieves justify their thefts and assaults and kidnappings and false imprisonments, and then they drag you into their kangaroo court. They make a legal determination for you. Think about it. That's exactly what they do. They say, oh, here we have a taxpayer. Let's go and collect our tax. They just accused you of being someone that's subject to their jurisdiction. Not everybody's subject to their jurisdiction. But they just arbitrarily just make a legal determination for you, and they cannot make a legal determination for you without representing you. So they're representing you by definition, and they have no qualifications to decide whether you're one of their slaves. And so they go and go ahead and just presume everything and assault you based on that. It's impossible for anyone to make a legal determination for you without representing you. Any bureaucrat who makes a legal determination for you and represents you after you fired him has breached the trust and perjured their oath. That's exactly what's going on. Think about it. The Constitution sets up a trust, and they breached the trust and they perjured their oath. And he's combined with, this is the Declaration of Independence, and so this is evidence that the same stuff was going on in the War of Independence. And if you go and look in the martial law video, we're under martial law. It goes into it in a lot more detail. But the Declaration of Independence is basically a list of grievances, and so one of the grievances is combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, unacknowledged by our laws, giving us assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Pretended legislation is color of law and martial law. And for imposing taxes on us without our consent, it has to be by consent. And they're actually all commercial, and the thieves know it, and they have no authority, but they just shove it down your throat and steal your property and put you in their jail and the whole 9 yards. And they for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, and that's taken from the Declaration of Independence. And then 2 years after the Declaration of Independence, the pig George III, in chapter 12 in 1778, the pig went and passed this taxes in commerce only, whereas taxation by the Parliament of Great Britain for the purposes of raising revenue in His Majesty's colonies, provinces, and plantations in North America has been found by experience to occasion great uneasiness and disorders. Well, no joke, Batman, that from and after the passing of this act, the King and Parliament of Great Britain will not impose any duty, tax, or assessment whatever payable in any of the colonies, provinces, or plantations in North America or the West Indies, except only such duties that may be expedient to impose for the regulation of commerce. Well, they know it's commerce, they know it's commercial. They're going to shove it down your throat whether you like it or not. It's all coming from the Vatican, and it's all satanic. And Patrick Henry, after he witnessed a man get flogged to death for refusing to take a license, coined the phrase, "Give me liberty or give me death." And that's what I told these border pigs too. They should have murdered me. They really should have, because by the time I'm done with them, they're going to wish they did, and I'll do it all within the law. And they got it coming. It ain't over. It is never over. These Canada Border Services Agency pigs put their conviction in the U.S. system so the U.S. border pigs could harass me at the border too. And then Elizabeth, the bitch, and if you watch my video about the Canada border pigs, I even go in there and I show how I called her a bitch in her own paperwork that I filed in their own court. And so anyways, Elizabeth, the bitch, the proof of service shows that the bitch received her notice and demand, and I need to qualify that, because I certainly don't have any disrespect towards dogs. You know, dogs, you know, if they are your enemy, they let you know up front. and they don't tell you that they're your friend, and then busy slipping a knife in your back. And so that's why I'm doing this, and I hope nobody takes offense as far as dogs are concerned. So anyways, the proof of service shows that the bitch received her notice and demand. It was recorded with the Pinal County Recorder on the 3rd of July. So she's been getting them for years, since 2007. And this is a copy of it. And so here you can see the registered mail number, and let's take a closer look. And there's the registered mail number, and you see that it was recorded with a Pinal County Recorder, so it's recorded into the public. And it says here, I do not give you the authority to make a legal determination for you. If you think you're representing me, you're fired. Neither you nor any other person is competent in dealing in my affairs, and I am competent in dealing in all of my affairs. And here's the proof of service, and here is the receipt I got from the post office, and here is the pink card that came back, and it shows that even that it was received by Buckingham Palace. And so she got it, and I have proof she got it, and was registered mail, so it's kept under lock and key during the whole time. And then I sent her more, okay, on the 19th of December 2011 and the 17th of December 2011. That's after this kangaroo court with Langston and his pigs in Lethbridge. I went and served her with this stuff, and invited her to the party. And so it was too heavy to be sending by a registered mail. Well, I had to send it by registered mail because I wanted proof of service. And so it was too heavy to send in one package, so I had to break it down in two. And so here is the notice and demand. And again, it's a standard notice and demand. And here's the registration numbers. And here is the some of the paragraphs. I mean, the thing was probably 20 or 30 pages long, but the important stuff is I told them that if you think you're representing me, you're fired. I have that statement in every document I serve, and neither you nor any person is competent in dealing in my affairs. I have that statement in every document that I serve, and I am competent in dealing in all of my affairs, and I have that statement in every document that I serve, and so. And then if you go in paragraph 3 there, that's not even underlined, I do not give you the authority to make a legal determination for me. And then it says that I claim the right to arrest people if they do it. But you know, but that doesn't stop them from doing it. Anyways, this is actually the proof of service. And the first there was 2 packages sent, and one of them never did show that it was received. It just shows that it was processed through, let's get in closer. It shows that it was processed through the sort facility in Great Britain, but it never came back. And there's the receipt I came from the post office. So, and then the other one shows that it was delivered. And so they were both delivered. And there's the receipt from the post office, and none of them came back. The proof of service that she received these 2 parts on by registered mail on December 11th and 19th and 17th of December. Elizabeth the pig, or the bitch, is named in this criminal complaint that's recorded with the Pinal County Recorder. Go ahead, look it up. Elizabeth, the Queen of Canada, is a pig, and don't get me going. I would say that she's perjured her oath, but she doesn't have a lawful valid current oath. And actually she was not coronated on the True Stone of Destiny, and there's a website that talks about it. And then the John Anthony Hill case went and challenged that, and the judge said it was immaterial, which tells me that the validity of the Queen's oath is immaterial. Well, actually that's not true, because that judge's oath is based on the Queen's oath. And so, unless, of course, the judge didn't have an oath, and if the judge was working for the Vatican, which actually is one of my contentions. Anyways, this is that John Anthony Hill case. A U.S. landmark or UK landmark case could stymie Queen's not a valid monarch, and this is a closer up shot of that website. For those who have been following the John Anthony Hill case, it's great to be able to share that he was acquitted in their Kangaroo court. Anyways, This is the ringleader of the criminal enterprise called Canada. This is the bitch. You know, she's getting ready to kick off pretty soon, so that's kind of too bad, because it'd be nice to see her do that little dance they do at the end of a common law rope. But she's got lots of spawn out there that are probably going to carry on the family tradition really well. Anyways, this is Tomlin's Law Dictionary, 1835 edition, and it says all oaths must be lawful, allowed by common law or some statute if they're administered by persons in a private capacity or not duly authorized. They are quorum non judice and void. And so, if think about it, if she doesn't have a valid oath, then all the other oaths precipitate from her. And so, therefore, nobody has a valid oath. They're all in their private capacity, and so then they're just nothing but a bunch of thieves. This site is taken from Book 3 of the Institutes and the Laws of England, and Book 4 on the Institutes and the Laws of England. That's Coke, okay? That's in the 1500s. And so this is not anything new. This is as old as time itself. And the proof of service that Michelle Jean received her notice and demand on the 9th of September 2010. Michelle Jean was the Governor General at the time. David Johnson's the successor. David Johnson's named in the Petition of Right. David Johnson's named in these criminal complaints. David Johnson has no lawful valid current oath. David Johnson, the Governor General of Canada, is an order taker and a pig. Now, an order taker is, you need to watch the Mark Passio's videos on natural law. He's a former Satanist priest, and he goes through and basically explains the pillars of Satanism and how we have a satanic society, and he talks about natural law. The guy is brilliant. He had to learn Latin when he was in high school, and so he is brilliant. He goes into the derivatives of these words and explains where they come from, and just has a lot of really good information. Now, when I rail on people on the Vatican, I certainly don't want anybody to think that I'm saying anything against Catholics. I have lots of wonderful friends who happen to be Catholic, and they're the ones that are feeding me a lot of this information about the Vatican, and so I certainly, many ways, the Catholic people are victims of this satanic organization as much as anybody else. And so I certainly don't want anybody to think that I'm saying anything negative about people that happen to be Catholic. Anyways, an order taker, somebody is too stupid to know then whether they're receiving an unlawful command or not, and cannot think for themselves, but needs someone to tell them what to do, as described in this Mark Passio's YouTube videos. And Mark Passio rightly says that all atrocities in history were committed by order takers, and this is Mark Passio's YouTube profile for anybody that wants to go check it out. The guy's brilliant. The proof of service shows that Harper received his notice and demand on the 9th of September 2009. All of this information is going to be compiled into a criminal complaint, and I'm going to record it in a counter recorders and send them with a copy. Send the pigs with a copy. Harper's named in these criminal complaints. Harper's named in the Petition of Right. Harper has no lawful valid current oath. Harper's bought and paid for. Harper is an order taker and a pig. Attorney General for Canada, Rob Nicholson, shows that he received his notice and demand on the 3rd of August 2010. He received another one on 17th of February 2011, and he received another one on 13th of December 2011. And this is the notice and demand, and this is getting up close, showing the registration number, and this is the underlined portions say I did not give you. And the important thing here is about that time I started doing and subordinates and successors. And so, and also, I'm not going to show all of the ones that I serve, because it would just get to be too much, and they all basically say the same things. And so, I just want to show, give you a few examples of what I sent, and then we'll skip showing all these things, because that'll make it shorter, and I'm sure you don't want it any longer than necessary. It just turns it into, an ordeal. Anyways, so I did not give you the authority to make a legal determination for me, and anyone making a legal determination for me, and I claim my freedom to arrest anyone making an unlawful legal determination for me or representing me without my prior written consent. And then Nicholson has noticed that if you think or assume you're representing me, you're fired. neither you is competent, or any man or woman is competent in dealing in my affairs, and I'm competent in dealing in all of my affairs. That's exactly what they do. Is they presume you're not competent. Matter of fact, they want to make you incompetent. I mean, think about it. That's if you have a lawyer representing you, then you are by definition incompetent, and so they want to shove their lawyers down your throat. This is all coming from the Vatican, and so think about it. That's exactly what's going on. This is the proof of service, and so then it shows that it was delivered. Here is the pink card, because I sent it from the States, and this is the receipt of from the U.S. Post Office, and it shows that it was received on the 13th of December 2011, and they signed for it. And he was Rob Nicholson's named in these criminal complaints. Rob Nicholson's named in the petition of right. Rob Nicholson has no lawful valid current oath. Rob Nicholson's bought and paid for. Rob Nicholson's an order taker and a pig. And what happened is, after that, Harper went and did a cabinet shuffle so that he could he wanted to make sure that all of his pig thugs have plausible deniability, so that they could continue to assault me and kidnap me and anybody else that thinks they have any rights. And so Harper planned this from the start, and Harper's in on it. Peter MacKay is the successor to Rob Nicholson. MacKay has no lawful valid current oath. MacKay is bought and paid for. MacKay is the Minister of Justice, is an order taker and a pig. And the public prosecution, Bernard, is subordinate to MacKay the pig. The proof of service shows that Bernard and his subordinates and successors received his notice and demand on 11th of February 2014. In an effort to shorten this video, I've omitted evidence of these proof, because it's basically going to say the same thing as these other ones that I've showed you. Bernard has no lawful valid current oath. Bernard is bought and paid for. Bernard is an order taker and a pig, and he's subordinate to MacKay the pig. Bernard's former boss, Curl, got his quid pro quo for holding his show trial in this Kangaroo court. And when MacKay and the pig appointed, and so then MacKay, the pig appointed a Curl to the Court of Queen's Bench. Okay, so that's his attaboy saying, hey, thanks for doing a good job having this Kangaroo court and railroading this guy, and so now we're going to appoint you to the Court of Queen's Bench. I can't tell you, that's happened to me before in Canada. There was a judge in Ontario. The same thing happened. His name was oh man, I'll think of his name here in a minute. Anyways, I went through and I was explaining how the Unemployment Insurance Act was color of law, and he was sitting there just deep in thought while he was saying it. And so then at the very end, I said, and if it's not color of law, it's just unconstitutional. And his jaw drops, and it's like his jaw dropped, and he just stood there with his mouth open looking at me like he couldn't believe what I'd said. And that was my mistake. I shouldn't have given him the alternative, because so then he reserved judgment, and he just sat there with his jaw dropped for a couple minutes, and then he reserved judgment, and then a couple later I got it from him saying that it was constitutional, and that's all he said. And then within a week, there was an announcement that he got appointed to the Court of Appeals. McPherson, that was his name, McPherson. And anyways, and that was in the Ontario Superior Court, or so-called Superior Court of Justice, which is just another Kangaroo UN court. Anyways, a curl is bought and paid for. A curl is an order taker and a pig. And this is the appointment, the thing from the Alberta, or the Department of so-called Justice website, where they're announcing this is a federal Department of Justice website. The pig Peter MacKay announced the following appointments: a curl, a lawyer for the Public Prosecution Service, is appointed to the Queen's Bench, and it says here. A curl, this was dated June 13th, which is just after I got out of their jail. Anyways, a curl has served as senior counsel and agent supervisor for the public, Bernard and his pigs. And so obviously that's what happened. I guarantee you that's what happened. Benkendorf is another lawyer for the Department of so-called Justice, and he's named in these criminal complaints. Benkendorf has no actual lawful valid current oath. Benkendorf is bought and paid for. Benkendorf is an order taker and a pig. The Minister of Public Safety of Canada is responsible for the border pigs. And so we'll go back to Stockwell Day, who was originally the Minister of Public Safety, and he was served with this notice that was recorded with the Pinal County Recorder, and he received it on 29th of May 2007. And then Vic Taze, who was his successor, received his notice and demand on 9th of July 2010, and Vic Taze received another notice on the 16th of February 2011. Vic Taze is named in these criminal complaints. Vic Taze is named in the petition of right. Stockwell Day is no lawful valid current oath. Stockwell Day is bought and paid for. Stockwell Day is an order taker and a pig. Vic Taze has no lawful valid current oath. Vic Taze is bought and paid for. Vic Taze is an order taker and a pig. Stephen Blaney is the successor to Vic Taze, and he intends to represent me without authority, and he intends to breach the trust. Blaney has no lawful valid current oath. Blaney's bought and paid for. Blaney's an order taker and a pig. The Canada Border Services Agency pigs are subordinates to Stephen Blaney the pig. Canada Border Services Agency pigs are subordinates to Stephen Harper the pig. And the Canada Border Services Agency pigs are subordinates to David Johnson the pig. And then there's the Minister Jerry Selk, who was the port director at the Pigs and Coots, received his notice and demand on the 14th of July 2010. And the proof of service shows that Athel, the Lieutenant Governor of Canada, received his notice and demand on the 16th of February 2011. And Athel is named in the criminal complaint. Athel is named in the petition of right. Athel intends to represent without authority, intends to breach the trust. Athel has no lawful valid current oath. Athel is bought and paid for. Athel is an order taker and a pig. Proof of service shows that Frank Oberle, Attorney General, received his notice and demand, that's the Solicitor General, on the 15th of September 2009. And then his subordinate, Brad Pickering, received his notice and demand on the same day. Oberle is named in the criminal complaint that's recorded with the Pinal County Recorder. Oberle intends to represent me without authority, intends to breach the trust. Oberle has no lawful valid current oath. Oberle is bought and paid for. Oberle is an order taker and a pig. Brad Pickering, matter of fact, all these criminal complaints, if you think about it, you know, what happens when I make a criminal complaint is it shifts the burden of proof on them to prove that what I was saying was not true. And not only have they not proven that it wasn't true, they've proven that it was true because of everything that went on. Because they went and assaulted me and kidnapped me and falsely imprisoned me. And so they actually proved that everything I said in those criminal complaints is true. And so Brad Pickering intends to represent me without authority, intends to breach the trust. Pickering has no lawful valid current oath. Pickering is bought and paid for. Pickering is an order taker and a pig. Alberta Attorney General Alison Redford, who became the Premier, received her notice and demand on the 5th of June 2009. Redford received another one on the 26th of January 2011. Redford is named in these three criminal complaints. Redford is named in the petition of right. Redford intends to represent me without authority. Redford's promoted to Premier as quid pro quo for sending Nancy McCurdy to conspire with Langston to get the petition of right dismissed. Redford has no lawful valid current oath. Redford's bought and paid for. Redford's an order taker and a pig. McCurdy is named in these criminal complaints, and because of the assaults and kidnappings and false imprisonment, they've proven that everything I said in those criminal complaints is true, and McCurdy intends to represent me without authority and breach the trust. McCurdy has no lawful valid current oath. McCurdy is bought and paid for. McCurdy is an order taker and a pig. Jonathan Dennis, who's the current Solicitor General for Alberta, and his subordinates and successors, received his notice and demand on the 3rd of December 2013. Now, I'm going to have to make up another criminal complaint, and I'm going to have to name his butt, and he's proven that all of this stuff is true because of you know, everything that went on. Dennis is a lawyer and a Solicitor General who oversees all prisons in Alberta. Dennis knows that all prisons in Alberta are de facto and all courts are de facto. Dennis intends to represent me without authority and intends to breach the trust. Dennis has no lawful valid current oath. Dennis is bought and paid for. Dennis is an order taker and a pig. These whores in Canada is the best justice system money can buy. Anyways, proof of service shows that Wister, the chief crown prosecutor, and his subordinates and successors received their notice and demand on the 5th of December 2013. Wister is a lawyer and an officer of the court and presumed to know the law. Wister knows that all prisons in Alberta are de facto and all courts in Alberta are de facto. Wister intends to represent me without authority and he intends to breach the trust. Wister intends to engage in a theft of my property. Wister has no lawful valid current oath. Wister is bought and paid for. Wister is an order taker and a pig. Whitman, N.C. Whitman, and his subordinates and successors received his notice and demand on the 14th of November 2014. Whitman intends to represent me without authority, and he intends to breach the trust. Whitman knows that Tillman, Rook, and other so-called judges are his subordinates. Whitman is named in the petition of right. Whitman is named in the criminal complaints. Whitman has no lawful valid current oath. Whitman's bought and paid for. Whitman's an order taker and a pig. And because Tillman and Rook and all of this stuff that went on did go on, it's proof that all of the stuff in these criminal complaints is absolutely true. And so I'm looking forward to seeing some of these whores do that little dance they do at the end of a common law robe. Judgment Day's coming, boys. The proof of service shows that J.D. Rook, Associate Chief Judge for Alberta, and his subordinates and successors received his notice and demand on the 15th of September 2010. And then Rook received another one on the 9th of December 2010. And then Rook received another one on 8th of November 2013. And this is... one of them. This is the one on 2013, and so let's get a closer look. This is the registration number. This is what I tell them. I did not give you the authority to make a legal determination for you. If you think or assume you're representing me or fired, neither you nor any other person is competent in dealing in my affairs, and I am competent in dealing on all of my affairs. And notice it says in all the paragraphs, it says subordinates and successors. And so, and got a load of this, eh? Whitman or Rook went and conspired with the post office to make it disappear. And see, look at this. There's the receipt, and let's get in a little closer. There's the receipt on the right-hand side of the screen, and then there's the tracking number, and it says underneath that, it says, we were not able to find any results. So, holy cow. I mean, you got Rook that's conspiring with people in the post office. That's fraud. That's big-time fraud. And Rook needs to spend some time in jail. And so then you have, there's the proof that it was served. There's the receipt, the postal stamp. There's the receipt showing the registration number. And it mysteriously disappears. Whoa, what's up with that? Rook knows that all so-called judges and the Court of Queen's Bench are his subordinates. Rook knows that he's conspired with post office clerks to destroy evidence of service of my documents, which is also mail fraud. Rook knows that he represented me without authority when he accused me of being a paper terrorist in his decision in Meads versus Meads, which is actually slander and defamation. And quite frankly, I find the accusation of being a paper terrorist is quite flattering. But realistically, it's not true, because if I was able to terrorize a bureaucrat into doing something contrary to his oath of office, the bureaucrat would be guilty of breach of trust. The simple fact of the matter is that if the bureaucrat changes his behavior because of something I have done, it's because I've shown him that he's being given unlawful commands, and he realizes he has no duty to obey an unlawful command. Matter of fact, he has a duty not to obey an unlawful command. Rook intends to represent me without authority, and he intends to breach the trust. Rook intends to deny due process with his master order for organized pseudo-legal commercial argument documents dated 18th of December 2013, pursuant to Meads versus Meads. And this is really good, okay? Rook really went and stuck his head in the noose in this one, because if you understand Meads versus Meads, that's a divorce case, okay? And so, and remember that the Meads versus Meads, any divorce is pursuant to a statute, right? So when Rook is in there dealing with a statute, he is a clerk. He's a clerk for an agency, and he goes and issues this order that affects everybody in every case, whether it's common law, whether any case that's dealt with in those kangaroo courts. This order affects it, and you're not allowed to file certain ways, and the naming, we're going to go through that. Rook really stuck his head in the noose in this one, and I just can't believe he was so stupid. But this is just so typical. These egotistical pigs think they can do just anything they want. and Rook really stuck his head in the noose in this one. And so then Rook is named in the petition of right. Rook is named in these criminal complaints, and by doing all of this stuff, Rook proved that everything I said in those criminal complaints was 100% true. And so I'm looking forward to Rook doing that little dance they do at the end of a common law rope. And here's his order. There it is, filed June 18th. Let's go in and look a little closer. June 18th, 2013, Master Order for Organized Pseudo-Legal Commercial Argument Documents. And he even says, pursuant to Meads versus Meads. And this is order pronounced on June 18, 2013. And the judicial whore, Rook, and it was his own idea. It was not even somebody didn't ask it. He just went ahead and just did it on his own. And this is just great stuff. This just shows how corrupt these criminals are, and what they think they can just get away with. And this is on the court's own motion, and it's hereby ordered. If you look at the bottom. Yeah, let's go back to there. If you look at the bottom, it says it's hereby ordered. The clerk shall review the documents proposed to be filed by any suspected OPCA litigant. So he wants to discriminate against anybody who thinks they have some rights, and to determine if any formal defect appear as it set out in List A. Okay, so we'll look at List A. If such documents contain any formal defects, the clerk shall refuse to file the documents. Okay, and so they're refusing to file the documents. Okay, so this is what Rook intends to do. He intends to compel his clerk authority on everybody, no matter what kind of case it is. And this is proof that all these courts are de facto UN courts, and they don't have the capability of seeing common law. It's a kangaroo court. They're nothing but a bunch of thieves. And there's the whore's signature right there. And so then there's the list. The litigant claims flesh and blood men. They don't want any flesh and blood or a freeman on the land. That's even under Roman civil law, or a freeman. They don't want any of that stuff on there. They don't want anybody thinking they're free. They're nothing but a bunch of taskmasters. This is a military dictatorship, and Rook is the ringleader of the whole thing. And so they don't want anything in there that's contrary to what their preconceived military dictatorship is talking about. See, look at that. They don't want a dash or a colon. They don't want anything to do with lineage, family of, house of, clan of. They don't want common law. They're basically arbitrarily using their military dictatorship to exclude common law. They don't want anybody having access to common law. Rook intends to make war on anyone who considers himself a living soul or freeman on the land, or a freeman. It's tyrants like Rook that precipitated the War of Independence when they flogged a man to death for refusing to take a license, which after having witnessed it, Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." It's tyrants like Rook that precipitated the Magna Carta. It's tyrants like Rook that precipitated the Confirmio Chartarum and numerous other things in history. This is a citation about a freeman. A freeman is a person who possesses and enjoys all civil and political rights belonging to people under free government. Who don't want those? A person who's not a slave. Obviously, Rook just wants slaves. And that's Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. If you do anything in the Alberta courts, then you're a slave. The distinction of freeman, this is Williams Law Dictionary, 1816 edition. The distinction of a freeman from a vassal. Okay, so they want slaves or vassals. They want slaves or vassals. That's really what it is. Freeman, this is Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. In Roman law, okay, so freeman is even in Roman law. And in Roman law, it denoted one is either born free or emancipated and was the opposite of a slave. And so they don't want freemen. They don't want. They want slaves. That's all they want. That's all they're going to deal with. And if you file anything with Rook, and this is all coming from, this is under the direction of Thill, the pig, and Harper, the pig, and Johnston, the pig, and Elizabeth, the bitch. And this is all under their directions and approval. And It's tyrants like Rooke that precipitated this English Civil War. It's tyrants like Rooke and Tillman who keep saying the Magna Carta no longer applies because they intend to precipitate another revolution. Rooke has no lawful valid current oath. Rooke is bought and paid for. Rooke is an order taker and a pig. The proof of service shows that Langston and his subordinates received his notice and demand on the 5th of January 2011. Langston's named in these criminal complaints. Langston intends to represent me without authority and breach the trust. Langston has no lawful valid current oath. Langston is bought and paid for. Langston is an order taker and a pig. The proof of service shows that Tillman received his notice and demand at the same time Rooke did, because Tillman's a subordinate of Rooke. And I did a motion for an order of prohibition under their color of law, United Nations Unidroit rules. And look it up. Go see what they say, what it says in the Corruption in the Courts 3, because that talks about the Unidroit and how all these courts are United Nations courts under Unidroit. The writ of prohibition is a common law writ that prohibits a lower court from proceeding, and Tillman was the judicial whore that dismissed the motion because under their rules you can't do an order, and we'll talk about that. During the show trial, Tillman even admitted that the color of Customs Act is color of law, and he even admitted that he had not read my 1,200 pages of written submissions, which is proof he prejudged it. Benkendorf the pig and Tillman the pig prohibited me from doing any further filings. And Tillman intends to represent me without authority, intends to breach the trust. Because of Tillman's order, I was preventing from filing a demand for a jury trial, a petition for writ of habeas corpus, several notices of constitutional question, challenging the Firearms Act, the Customs Act, the Criminal Code, the Canada Border Services Agency Act, the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench Act, the Provincial Court Act, the Evidence Act, Alberta Judiciary Act. Tillman, Rooke, and their Vatican Crown pig buddies in Canada use their Unidroit 1,200 pages of rules to deny due process, and their notice of constitutional question is a prime example, because you can't challenge the constitutionality of one of their fictitious laws unless you provide notice first. If you do not provide notice, they pretend it didn't happen. Tillman the pig conspired in open court with Benkendorf the pig to deny me due process, represent me without authority, and breach the trust. In his written decision, Tillman the pig even used the terminology OPCA, organized pseudo-legal commercial argument, which is coined by his boss Rooke, which is further proof that he's following orders, further proof that the case was prejudged in the beginning. Tillman has no lawful valid current oath. Tillman is bought and paid for. Tillman the whore is an order taker and a pig. And Tillman proved that all of my criminal complaints that I filed and referenced in this case are 100% true. The proof of service shows that Vickery received her notice and demand on the 8th of December 2010. Proof of service shows she received another one on 8th of November 2013. And this is a copy, so this is the registration number, and then it says, I did not give you the authority to make a legal determination for you. If you think you represent me, you're fired. I'm competent in dealing all of my affairs, and you're not competent. And there's, look at this. And the reason I'm showing this one is because there's some more fraud going on where Vickery went and made the thing disappear. Look at that. And so it says we were not able to find any results. And yet, look at that. The post office received it. There's the receipt. And so Vickery's engaged in some fraud and mail fraud and destroying evidence of service. Vickery knows that she's conspired to with the postal clerks to destroy evidence of service of my documents, which is also mail fraud. Vickery intends that she and her subordinates represent me without authority and intends to breach the trust. Vickery has no lawful valid current oath. Vickery's bought and paid for. Vickery's an order taker and a pig. Matchett, the chief judge, received his notice and demand on 8th of November 2013 when Vickery received hers, because Matchett is a successor to Vickery. Proof of service shows that that Matchett also received another one on 6th of January 2014. Matchett's a chief provincial judicial whore, intends that he is and his subordinates represent me without authority and intends to breach the trust. Matchett has no lawful valid current oath. Matchett's bought and paid for. Matchett's an order taker and a pig. Lefevre
He's the assistant or associate chief judge of the provincial court. Received his notice and demand on 3rd of January 2014, and knows that he's conspired with postal clerks to destroy evidence, the service of my documents, which is also mail fraud, because it was the same thing. It's all of a sudden the post office, it disappeared. And here it is right here. And here's the registration number, and here is, if you think you're representing me, you're fired. See, they intend to represent you one way or another. They don't want to tell them they're fired. That's why they do that. I guarantee you that they're not competent in my affairs, and I'm competent in all of my affairs. And look at this. It was accepted at the post office. See, I kind of picked up on that stuff. And so here the postal office's website even shows that it was accepted. There's the tracking number, and then there's the stamp. And then all of a sudden, they weren't able to find any results. It's amazing how that works. It's a magical thing. And so they weren't able to find any results, and there's the receipt. Lefevre intends that he and his subordinates represent me without authority, intends to breach the trust, has no lawful valid current oath, is bought and paid for, is a judicial whore, as an order taker and a pig. The grand juror, associate chief judge in Lethbridge, received his notice on the 5th of December 2013. The grand juror intends to represent me without authority, and the grand juror intends to breach the trust, intends to perjure his oaths, has no lawful valid current oath, is bought and paid for, and is an order taker and a pig. Hironaka received his notice on the 12th of January 2014. Hironaka is a subordinate to Le Grand Juror, and so that's why when Le Grand Juror got it, Hironaka got it too. Hironaka is operating under supervision and control of his bosses, Le Grand Juror, Lefevre, and Matchett. And here it is, or it shows that it was refused. Okay, so they refused it because they don't want. So they knew that they were engaged in mail fraud and destruction of evidence. So now they're going ahead and refusing the whores. And so here it is where it was refused. And there's the stamp, and then there's the envelope right there where it shows refused. And Hironaka intends to represent me without authority, intends to breach the trust, has no lawful valid current oath, prejudged my case and represented me without authority by entering a plea without my consent. Hironaka is bought and paid for as an order taker and a pig. Redmond and his subordinates received their notice on the 12th of February 2014. Redmond is a subordinate of the grand juror. Redmond's operating under the supervision of his and control of his boss, the grand juror, and Redmond refused a notice and demand that I sent him as well. And so there's the envelope. And when I showed up for their show trial, I asked Redmond's name, and he refused to give it. And then I said, "If you think you're representing me, you're fired." And I left. And it was all over the news. So if anybody has any doubt, it was all over the news. Matter of fact, I was kind of like a celebrity when I went in their jail, because the guys were introducing me. This is the guy that fired the judge. Anyways, Redmond intends to represent me without authority. Redmond intends to get his shrink buddies working for Alberta Healthcare to declare me insane, to compel me to be a slave, and discredit anyone who thinks they have any rights. And it's for deliberate political repression. Redmond intends to represent me, intends that his judicial whore buddies represent me without authority, which is why he ordered me not to post any more letters. Redmond's not neutral or detached. It's a kangaroo court. Redmond's kangaroo court was de facto, just like the Canada Border Services Agency is de facto, and they have no authority. Redmond's kangaroo court is really a UN court operating under Unidroit. Constitution is a delegation of authority. Governments are but trustees acting under derived authority and have no power to delegate what is not delegated to them. But people, as the original fountain, might take away what they have delegated and entrust. So the B&A bill is a trust indenture and with delegated authority, and that's extremely important. And there's no such thing as a power of inherent sovereignty in the government of the United States or Canada. In this country, sovereignty resides in the people. Congress can exercise no power which they have not by their constitution entrusted to it. All else is withheld. And so the same thing in Canada, it's a trust indenture. And then there's maxims of law that say that a delegate cannot delegate, an agent cannot delegate his functions to a sub-agent unless he be expressly authorized to do so. Well, I am having trouble seeing in the B&A bill anything that talks about United Nations. I am just having trouble with that. And so maybe, or even yet, a corporation called Canada. A trust indenture, a trust is not a corporation. It's a completely separate type of entity. Anyways, these are maxims of law. A delegated power cannot be delegated again. A deputy cannot have or appoint a deputy. And these are maxims of law that are as old as time itself. There's no delegated authority for a corporation called United States or an agency, department, commission, or board or entity of any such corporation. And this is 28 U.S.C. Section 3002, and that's the judiciary in the United States. And so if you sue the United States, you have to sue a federal corporation or any agency, department. That means any agency or department or entity or any instrumentality. All banks are instrumentalities, by the way. It's an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act, being bankrupt and insolvent. And then it goes on, the official capacities of all United States governmental officers, and departments, and is further evidence that the United States federal government exists today in name only. That's taken from a U.S. Congressional Record, March 17, 1993, volume 33. There's no delegated authority in the United States for a corporation called the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There's no delegated authority for a corporation called National Security Agency or Central Intelligence Agency or Department of Homeland Security or Internal Revenue Service or Department of the Treasury or Office of the Attorney General. And there's no delegated authority for a municipal corporation called City of Fort Worth, City of Grand Prairie, any municipal corporation, any prison corporation, a corporation called Department of Public Safety in any state, a corporation called Texas State Police in any state, or State Police in any state. The same thing's going on in Canada. There's Canada's bankrupt. This is the thing for an application for a SIN number. And it says that if you're replacing the SIN card, you got to pay a $10 fee, and you make a check payable to the Receiver General for Canada. Think about it. That's a receiver in bankruptcy. There's no delegated authority for a corporation called Canada. There's no delegated authority for a corporation called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. That's the pigs that assaulted me, that drugged me into that jail. There's no delegation of authority for a corporation called Canada Border Services Agency. There's no delegation of authority for a corporation called Lethbridge Correctional Center. There's no delegation of authority for a corporation called Calgary Remand Center. There's no authority in Canada or the United States to delegate any power to the United Nations or any United Nations agency. All these so-called courts in Canada and the United States and many other countries are United Nations courts, are de facto, are thieves, are pigs, are pirates, and in some cases are murderers. Ultra vires. This is taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition. The term has a broad application and includes not only acts prohibited by the Charter, but acts which are in excess of powers granted. An act involves ultra vires when a corporation has authority to perform it under any circumstances or for any purpose. Ultra vires act of municipality is one which are beyond the powers conferred upon it by law. And so everything they do is ultra vires. And they know it. That's why they put this section in the Criminal Code of Canada. It says, obedience to de facto law. No person shall be convicted of an offense in respect of an act or omission in obedience to the laws for the time being made and enforced by persons in de facto possession of the sovereign power in and over the place where the act or omission occurs. Well, that's exactly what's going on. And they just completely ignored that. They're nothing but a bunch of thieves. They're completing their commercial transaction. Don't get me going. All courts in Canada and the United States are United Nations courts under the Unidroit Treaty and have been for over 30 years. All courts are de facto courts. There is no authority to delegate anything to the United States in the Constitution for the United States of America or the British North America Act. Unidroit stands for the Unification of Private Law, and the website says that 63 countries have adopted it, and it's designed to be automatically implemented. Canada and the United States have been signatories for over 30 years. Unidroit website says nothing about Texas or Arizona or any of the American states or the Canadian provinces. Therefore, Unidroit application in the American states or the Canadian is only in federal areas. And so all of these courts are federal. I don't care if it's state or federal. They're calling it state or federal. It's still federal. Unidroit covers negotiable instruments. What do you think they take when you go into their Kangaroo courts? They want commercial negotiable instruments. They want cash or a check or they're all negotiable instruments. If you took gold or silver, I guarantee you what they would do is they'd convert it into the current rate at their negotiable instruments. In other words, 1 troy ounce of silver, a silver eagle, is worth about $20 in IOUs, and so they convert it into IOUs and put it on their books as IOUs. And the Unidroit covers civil procedure. What kind of rules do you think they follow? Civil procedure. What Unidroit covers secured transactions. They deal in commercial transactions. Unidroit covers legal status of women. Why do you think the Divorce Act is a perfect example? Is that women are now persons, and so they can do a divorce. Whereas at common law, the courts have nothing to say with women because at common law, women are the children belong to the husband, and they have to deal with the husband. Maintenance obligations, that's talking about women and families. It's Unidroit contracts. That's why they refused my documents, because I was telling them they were fired. Banking law, everything they do is under banking law and negotiable instruments. And here's the Unidroit website, and this is getting a little closer. Commercial contracts, cultural property, franchising. And this is a big picture, and this is getting a little closer. Leasing, security interest, transport, banking law, capital markets, civil procedure, contracts, cultural property, franchising, hotel keepers, insurance, intellectual property, leasing, legal status of women, maintenance obligations, movement of persons, negotiable instruments. Anytime, why do you think they spell your name in all block capital letters when you get on an airline? Why do you think they got these TSA pigs all over airports assaulting people to get on an airline? Unidroit covers mandatory insurance. Yeah, so they cover insurance. See, this is right there. It says insurance, and they make it mandatory. And so anything related to marriage, divorce, or children. And this is actually taken from part of their website. It talks about the 1955 Treaty on Compulsory Insurance Against Civil Liability, and this is a 1958 convention concerning the recognition and enforcement of decisions relating to maintenance obligations towards children. And so this is all coming from the UN and Unidroit. And the United States, so this is all federal. And so any state law in the United States that's talking about motor vehicles is actually a federal law. And so then Title 18, United States Code, Section 31 applies. And the term motor vehicle means every description or carriage of or other contrivance propelled or drawn by mechanical purposes and used for commercial purposes on the highways. And so it's got to be commercial. And they even define what commercial is. So they actually have a pretty good statute in the federal, but these state pigs go ahead and assault you and based on their commercial crimes because you don't have a motor vehicle. And anyways, Canada and the United States are signatories under the Unidroit Treaty. As of this date, 63 countries have signed the Unidroit Treaty. There's Australia, there's Canada, there's the United Kingdom, there's United States, there's a whole bunch of them here. Texas is not listed, Arizona's not listed, no American state. Alberta, BC are not listed, Ontario, no Canadian province. Therefore, anything involving motor vehicles or the courts is both commercial and federal and by consent. So they represent you without authority and they make sure you can't fire them. And anything in America, Canada or United States, federal or state, and I'm sure Mexico too, quite frankly, but I haven't, I don't read Mexican Spanish, and so I haven't got evidence of that. But involving motor vehicles or the courts or the banks or finance falls under Unidroit. And this is The Provincial Court Act, the court does not have jurisdiction to hear cases, paragraph C, for malicious prosecution, false imprisonment, and or an action against a peace officer for anything done by that person while executing the duties. See, this is a kangaroo court. They can't even hear the issues that I wanted to bring up. They drugged me into their kangaroo court, and they refused to move it into the Queen's Bench, which it wouldn't have made any difference anyways, because they're a kangaroo court too. But anyways, and so then this is 1835 Tomlin's Law Dictionary, and it talks about this as if a part of a cause arises within an inferior jurisdiction as part of thereof without of it, the inferior jurisdiction ought not to hold a plea. Okay, and you got to understand, if you go back to this provincial court, that's if they have a limited jurisdiction, that's an inferior jurisdiction. A superior court has general jurisdiction, and an inferior court has limited. And so they're basically saying in the statute that it's an inferior court. And so the superior court, an inferior court of record, not of record, cannot impose a fine in prison. Well, it's a commercial transaction is what it is. They're a bunch of thieves. And this is Thompson versus Smith. And we already talked about this a little bit. When acting to enforce a statute and subsequent amendments to the present date, the judgment of a municipal court is acting as an administrative officer and not in a judicial capacity. Courts administering or enforcing statutes do not act judicially, but merely as an extension or an agent for the involved agency. It's a kangaroo court. Redmond intended to deny me any of my common law rights, including my right to due process, in his kangaroo court in his summary proceeding, and that was all intended by Harper the pig, McKay the pig, Johnston the pig, Battenberg the pig, Redford the pig, Bernard the pig, Benkendorf the pig, Dennis the pig, Ethel the pig, Rook the pig, Matchett the pig, Granger the pig, all these pigs. And a kangaroo court is a self-appointed tribunal or mock court which principles of law and justice are disregarded, perverted, and parodied. A court or a tribunal characterized by unauthorized irregular procedures so as to render fair proceeding impossible. A sham legal proceeding, and that's exactly what went on. That's Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. A summary proceeding is any proceeding which is settled without the aid of a jury. Okay, so there's no common law without presentment of the indictment, and it's out of the regular course of common law. So there's no common law there. Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. A kangaroo court is the term descriptive of a sham legal proceeding in which a person's rights are totally disregarded, in which the result is a foregone conclusion because of the bias of the court or the tribunal. Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition. Summary proceeding. A non-jury proceeding that settles a controversy, a plenary action. The common law is wholly a stranger to summary proceedings. That's Black's 8th. A plenary jurisdiction is a military dictatorship. Plenary jurisdiction accords full and absolute power of the subject matter and the party in the case. Absolute power. Military dictatorship. Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. Summary proceeding is another name for a star chamber that was abolished in England. Star chamber in England required defendants to have counsel. Star chamber stood for swiftness and arbitrary power. Okay, that's admiralty. Arbitrary is admiralty, is a dictatorship. It was a limitation on the common law. In other words, there is no common law. That's the U.S. Supreme Court. Redmond's not acting as a judge, but he was acting to enforce a statute. When acting to enforce a statute, courts administering or enforcing statutes do not act judicially, but merely ministerially. Ministerial officers are incompetent to receive grants of judicial power from the legislature, and their acts in attempting to exercise such powers are necessary nullities. Tillman the whore and his handler Rook the whore both became clerks to aid and abet Redmond and to enforce his Roman civil statute. Judges who become involved in enforcement of mere statutes, civil or criminal in nature or otherwise, act as mere clerks for the involved agency. All of this was under instructions from Elizabeth the bitch, no disrespect to dogs intended, and when they did all of this, they proved every statement in the criminal complaints that were already filed. They were filed before all of this happened in the counter recorders, Pinal counter recorder, and I've listed them all in this presentation. And so they proved that all of that stuff is true. And then there's a judge ceases to sit as a judicial officer because the governing principles of administrative law provide that courts are prohibited from substituting their evidence, testimony, record, arguments, rationale for that of the agency. Additionally, courts are prohibited from their substituting their judgments for that of the agency. And that's a federal case. It is accepted rule not only state courts but federal courts as well. But when a judge is enforcing administrative law, they are described as mere extensions of the administrative agency and for superior reviewing purposes as a ministerial clerk for an agency. Redmond has no immunity, but his whore buddies Rook the Pig, Whitman the Pig, Tillman the Pig, Langston the Pig, and other pig buddies like Ethel, Battenberg, Johnson, and Harper will make sure that any lawsuit goes nowhere. Judges loses his absolute immunity from damage actions only when he acts in clear absence of all jurisdiction or performance of an act which is not judicial in nature. When enforcing mere statutes, judges of all courts do not act judicially and thus are not protected by qualified or limited immunity. Officers of the court have no immunity when violating a constitutional right, for they're deemed to know the law. An officer who acts in violation of the Constitution ceases to represent the government. So Redmond wasn't a judge. He wasn't representing the government. He was a thief. Redmond is an imposter putting on a charade with his Kangaroo court to complete his quasi-contract. Imposters, and this is remember, this is all coming from the Vatican. So the idea of it being religious is exactly right on. Those who falsely pretend an extraordinary commission from heaven or terrify and abuse people with false denunciations of judgment, and that's Tomlin's Law Dictionary, 1835 edition. Williams Law Dictionary, 1816 edition, basically says the same thing. Burn a New Law Dictionary, 1792, says the same thing and adds a few things. Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. Imposter, one who pretends to be someone else to deceive others, especially to receive the benefits of a negotiable instrument. Well, how do you think these pigs get paid? Redmond or CBSA pigs, neither Redmond nor the CBSA pigs had any jurisdiction. Where there's no jurisdiction, there's no judge. The proceeding is as nothing. Such has been the law from the days of Marshalsea. And that's a maxim of law that's cited by the U.S. Supreme Court and also in Coke, which is in the 1500s. Canada Border Services Agency pigs made a void judgment, and Redmond the Pig made a void judgment. Void judgment is one which has no legal force or effect whatever. It's an absolute nullity. Its invalidity may be asserted by any clerk by any persons whose rights are affected at any time and any place. It need not be attacked directly, but may be attacked collaterally whenever and wherever it's interposed. Void order may be attacked either directly or collaterally at any time. A void judgment is one which from its inception is and forever continues to be absolutely null and without legal efficacy, ineffectual to bind the parties or to support a right, of no legal force and effect whatever, and incapable of enforcement in any manner to any degree. A void order, this is some English court cases that talk about the same thing. A void order results from a fundamental defect of proceedings or from a without jurisdiction act of a public body or judicial office holder. A without jurisdiction act is any act which a court did not have power to do. A void order is incurably void, and all proceedings based on an invalid claim or void act are also void. Even a decision of the higher courts will be void if the decision is founded on an invalid claim or void act, because something cannot be founded on nothing. D.G. Redmond is working under instructions passed down from Battenberg, Johnson, Ethel, Harper, Redford, Whitman, Rook, Matchett, and Lefevre. Redmond the Pig represented me further by demanding an excise tax called a victim fine surcharge tax, which is further proof the pigs intend to represent me without authority. I did not consent to their show trial or their Kangaroo court, as evidenced by the fact their magistrate Dollywall the Pig wrote refused on their judgments and orders when I was supposed to approve them with my signature. These pigs intend to compel me one of their quasi-contracts and their compelled signatures, which I rejected and autographed without prejudice, all rights reserved, no assured value, no liability. Redmond is working under the direct supervisions and instructions of Le Grand Juror. Redmond prejudged my case from the beginning. Redmond intends to breach the trust. Redmond intends to perjure his oath. He doesn't even have an oath. Redmond doesn't have a lawful valid current oath because the person who administered the oath does not have a lawful valid current oath, because Battenberg does not have a lawful valid current oath. Redmond is bought and paid for. Redmond is an order taker and a pig. Not every action by any judge is an exercise of his judicial function. It is not a judicial function for a judge to commit an intentional tort, even though the tort occurs in the courthouse. When a judge acts as a trespasser of the law, when a judge does not follow the law, the judge loses subject matter jurisdiction, and the judge's orders are void and have no legal force or effect. Brutum fulmen, an empty noise, an empty threat, a judgment void upon its face, which is in legal effect, no judgment of all, by which no rights are divested, from which none can be obtained, neither binds nor bars anyone. Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. Based on a void judgment, the RCMP pigs arrested me, which is false arrest, and then falsely imprisoned me in their Calgary Remand Center and their Lethbridge Correctional Center for 82 days. But there's no way that I'll ever see justice at the hands of these Vatican Jesuit whores like Redmond the pig, Rookman the pig, Whitman the pig, Tillman the pig, which is what these pigs intend. And Elizabeth the bitch, no disrespect to dogs intended. These judicial whores intend that their brain-dead idiot, low intelligence hired thugs assault us and kidnap us and falsely imprison us because it's so good for business. The only way we'll ever see any real justice is to demand our common law jury of one of our peers, and we need to know what that is. A true common law jury does not take instructions from the judge. A true common law jury calls the witnesses, questions the witnesses. A true common law jury determines the law and the facts. A true common law jury can ignore any statute or law. That's called jury nullification. A true common law jury will pronounce sentence, if any, and a true common law jury is not subject to appeal. Do you want to place your future in the hands of United Nations whore who wants to sit on the bench and play stupid? Do you want to put the future of your wife and children in the hands of one of these judicial whores that have complete immunity no matter what? Because if you sue one of them, you have to get one of their whore buddies to do it. Some of them want to really do justice, but are you going to take the chance that you got a good one? Do you want to place your future in the hands of a whore that is bought and paid for by these crown pigs? Do you want to place yourself in the hands of a judicial whore who's intent in converting you into a ward of the court? Do you consider yourself a Christian? Do you consider yourself, do you try to follow the golden rule? Do you treat others the way you want to be treated? Do you think you'll get any sympathy from God on Judgment Day when you have not done everything you can to put a stop to these satanic judicial whores selling their justice? Karma is the universal principle of what goes around comes around. If we knowingly allow these judicial whores to victimize tens of thousands of people in the name of their satanic religious ceremonies, don't you think that we'll be held accountable? Don't you think it will come back around? Don't you think it's already coming back around at us every day when they sell their justice in their de facto so-called courts, when their revenue officers masquerading as police officers unlawfully arrest us for commercial crimes like speeding, when they deny us due process based on one of their fictitious quasi-contracts, when they populate their prisons with victimless crimes? All judges are foreign agents of the Vatican. See the presentation on bar members. This idea of separation of church and state was really about taking Christianity out of the government and displacing it with satanic Roman civil law from the Vatican. All so-called court cases are actually satanic religious ceremony by priests of Baal. Under the guise of the separation of church and state, they've taken the Lord's Prayer out of the schools. They've taken Christian symbols out of the courts. They've taken Christian symbols out of the schools. They've converted our Christian government into satanic government, and it's all been done by court rulings from these priests of Baal masquerading as judges. At common law, there are no prisons. That's why common law is so severe. All prisons are commercial. Most of the people in prison are there for victimless crimes. We need to fire the whores and end the tyranny of these de facto United Nations courts and their Vatican judicial whores selling their justice. Our court is only a jury of our peers, and we're all being denied it, so these judicial whores can populate their prisons and collect their royalties. We need to work together to bring these whores to justice. I would like to see some of these whores do that little dance they do at the end of a common law rope. I'm glad that it's up to a jury of my peers and not me. We can never take the law into our own hands because that makes us worse than them. And my conscience is clear. I'm completely innocent. And they do not want a common law jury to hear it. That's why they held their de facto kangaroo court and issued their void judgment and were so adamant about denying me due process. They have no right to do anything but by common law, and this is chapter 29 of the Magna Carta. No freeman shall be taken or imprisoned or seized or exiled in any way destroyed, nor will we go upon him nor send upon him except by the lawful judgment of his peers or the law of the land. And the law of the land is not a statute. The law of the land as here used does not mean a statute for working the wrong. This section was taken with some modifications from the 29th chapter of the Magna Carta, which provided that no freeman should be taken or imprisoned or seized of his freehold by the lawful judgment of his peers, the law of the land. Lord Coke in his commentary on the statute says these words by the law of the land mean by the due course and process of law, which he afterwards explains to be by indictment and presentment of good and lawful men, where such deeds were done in due manner and original of the common law. And that's a New York Supreme Court case. Phrase law of the land means common law to be the statutes which would deprive a citizen of the right of a person or property without regular trial according to the course and usage of common law would not be the law of the land. And so these statutes, that's why when the judge is representing or working with a statute, he's not a judge anymore, he's a clerk. And it's the same principle, okay? Statutes are not law of the land. And the judge, when they're dealing with a statute, is not a judge; he's a clerk. Tillman, under the directions of his handler Rook, say that the Magna Carta is out of date and doesn't apply anymore. Tyrants have been saying that many times, including the War of Independence and the Glorious Revolution and other times. Chapter 13 says that there's be free customs because they're obviously tired of being assaulted by their customs pigs at that time. And the city of London shall have its ancient liberties and free customs as well by land and water. Furthermore, we decree and grant that all other cities, boroughs, towns, ports shall have all their liberties and free customs. So they were obviously tired of these customs pigs in their day. The principle that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property except by due process of law did not originate in the American system of constitutional law, but was contained in the Magna Carta, sometimes referred to as Chapter 29, confirmed on the 19th of June, 1215. No freeman shall be taken or imprisoned or seized or outlawed or exiled or anywise destroyed, nor we go upon him nor send upon him, but by the lawful judgment of his peers, the law of the land. It has been said that the principle was known before Magna Carta and that it was originally designed to secure the subject against arbitrary action of the crown. Gee, that sounds like military dictatorship. And to place him under protection of the law, it is settled beyond question that this principle came from England to America as part of the common law and has been a fundamental rule of common law. When first adopted Magna Carta, the phrase law of the land had reference to the common law and has been a fundamental rule of common law. And that's found in Book 16 of the American Jurisprudence, 2nd edition, Constitutional Law, Section 543. Law of the land means common law. It is a manifest that has not left the legislative power to enact any process which might be devised. The due process article is a restraint on the legislative as well as the executive and judicial powers of government and cannot be so construed as to leave Congress free to make any due process of law by its mere will. In other words, it's statute, they're a clerk, and they have no authority. What is due process of law may be ascertained by examination of those settled usages and modes of proceedings existing in common law and statute law of England before the immigration of our ancestors. The expressions due process of law and law of the land have the same meaning. The law intended by the Constitution is the common law that had come down from us to us from our forefathers as it existed and was understood and administered when that instrument was framed and adopted. When a felony is being committed, an arrest may be made without warrant to prevent any further violation of the law. When a felony has been committed and the officer or private individual is justified by the facts within his knowledge and believing that the person arrested has committed the crime, all breaches of the peace and assaults and batteries for the purpose of restoring order immediately. And that's the treatise on the limitations of police power. But there was never a breach of the peace. These pigs just go ahead and assault you. At common law, arrests for misdemeanors are not permissible without a warrant except for acts committed in the presence of the officer causing the breach of the peace. The legal principle underlying this case and the one to be applied to the facts is firmly embodied in the roots of the common law, which has been handed down to us from early times, unimpaired in its full vigor for the protection of personal liberty against illegal arrests. The liberty of a person is too important a matter to the state to be interfered with without the safeguards with which the law guards such invasions. This court has said the limits of the power of arrest of a constable without process is well defined at common law. The regard for liberty of the person was so great that the common law did not confer upon a mere conservator of the peace the power to touch the person to the subject of his own volition, except in those cases when interests in the public absolutely demanded it. The stopping of an automobile by a highway patrol officer for inspection of a driver's license or for any other purposes where it is accomplished by the authority of the officer is an arrest. And those pigs arrested me. Any restraint, however slight, upon another's liberty to come and go as one pleases constitutes an arrest. An illegal arrest is an assault and battery The person so attempted to be restrained of his liberty has the same right to use force in defending himself as he would in repelling any other assault and battery. Each person has a right to resist an unlawful arrest. In such a case, the person attempting the arrest stands in the position of the wrongdoer and may be resisted by the use of force as in self-defense. They unlawfully arrested me, the pigs. One may come to the aid of another being unlawfully arrested, just as he may where one is being assaulted, molested, raped, or kidnapped. Thus, it is not an offense to liberate one from the unlawful custody of an officer, even though he may have submitted to such custody without resistance. Similarly, a person cannot be convicted of resisting a peace officer in the execution of his duty unless the officer was acting strictly within the limits of his power and duty. If the officer makes an unlawful arrest, then there is a common law right to resist that arrest. And that's taken from the Police Manual of Arrest, Seizure, and Interrogation by Roger Salhaney, is a Canadian judge. The reason for the initial detention and speeding and running a red light are not a breach of the peace. So they have no authority. Speeding and red lights are not breaches of the peace. I did not breach the peace. These pigs assaulted me. The breach of the peace takes place when either assault is committed on an individual or public alarm and excitement is caused. Mere annoyance or insult is not enough. Thus, at common law, a householder cannot give a man into custody for violently and persistently ringing his doorbell. It is the particular duty of a magistrate or police officer to preserve the peace unbroken. Hence, if he has a reasonable cause to believe that a breach of the peace is imminent, he may be justified in committing an assault or effecting an arrest. Black's 8th. Breach of the peace is a violation or disturbance of the public tranquility and order, and the offense of breaking, breaking, or disturbing the peace by any riotous, forcible, or unlawful proceeding. Breach of the peace is a generic term, includes all violations of public peace or order that acts tending to be a disturbance. One who commits a breach of the peace is guilty of disorderly conduct, but not all disorderly conduct is necessarily a breach of the peace. Black's 4th. Breach of the peace is a violation of public order, and one guilty of an offense may be held to bail. An act in public indecorum is also a breach of the peace. The remedy for this offense is by indictment. Persons who go out on strike and then linger, and so anyways, Bouvier's Law, 1897 edition. Unless there's a breach of the peace or a common law felony, which is another word for a breach of the peace, committed in front of the peace officer, they have nothing to say to you. These pigs at the border are not peace officers, they're hired thugs. It is my opinion that they're pigs. It is my opinion that well over 90% of the people who work as peace officers are honest, hardworking people who are very patriotic and take their oaths of office very seriously. Many of them have not been properly trained. Many of them are under pressure to generate revenue. The burden's on us to educate them since their bosses are obviously not doing it. What can we do? Lay a proper foundation so they cannot claim ignorance. Demand a common law court. Know what a common law court is so you can tell if they really give you a common law court. Complain to the Judicial Council, which is a council of whores, and make sure you bring up the right issues. Complain to politicians. Make YouTube videos, circulate them around far and wide. Realize it is never over until you say it's over. It is never over. These pigs should have murdered me because by the time I'm done with them, they're going to wish they did, and I'll do it all within the law. And I told them that too. It is never over. Always remember, we the people are the ones that are really in control, not a gang of Vatican judicial whores selling their justice, and not their hired thugs, and not the Canada border pigs. We can refuse to participate in their de facto system. We can educate ourselves about what a common law jury is and what the law of the land is. We can educate ourselves so we know when our rights are being violated. We can educate our public servants, because many of them do not know any more than we do. We can educate other people by circulating this video and any other way possible. We can demand a common law jury of our peers. We can work with our friends and neighbors to reestablish our common law juries and our common law de jure courts. We can work with our friends and neighbors to get the United Nations out of America and Canada and anywhere else that wants to be free. United Nations is owned and operated by the bankster thieves and their Vatican handlers, and that is the source of all of these problems. There's an organization called Life Leadership, and they talk about a world shift. There's a world shift that's happening, and it's really only 3 to 5% of the people that do anything. It was 3 to 5% of the people that precipitated the American Revolution, and the bankster thieves in there today are only 3 to 5% of the people. And historically, every 100 years, plus or minus, there's been a major change in our freedoms, and it's called a world shift. In 1776 to 1793, I think, there was a world shift towards freedom, and it was the Constitution and some things that happened around that time. In 1913 to 1934, there was a world shift towards force, and that was with the Federal Reserve Act, the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, and some other things that happened then. And right now, we're in the middle of a world shift. Right now, the world shift is towards force. But every 100 years, for the last 3,500 years, give or take, there's been a world shift towards either freedom or force. And what Life Leadership is trying to do is they want to provide educational material about what the issues are, provide a way of bringing people together, provide a way of they want to affect that world shift towards freedom by doing all of this. And they want leaders, and they want to generate revenue through network marketing for the people in Life Leadership, so that they can basically create leaders that are properly educated and know the law, and know what the issues are. And so this is their website. They have the 8 F's. There's faith, family, finances, fitness, following, freedom, friends, and fun. Following is leadership, and you have to have balance. You cannot just be focused on one thing. Your family's important, finance is important. If you're a slavery to debt, then freedom doesn't do you much good. And so you have to have balance. And so that's why they provide educational material on all of these topics, so that we can have balance. Some of the CDs and DVDs are available, cover rascals and rascal radio, potential constitutional changes like townships, which I particularly like, leadership development, corporate leadership. When I was working for U.S. Airways in management, they actually made leadership training available for me, which I accepted. And this is the same kind of training. And there's corporations that are using their leadership training. Airlines and other corporations are using the leadership training that Life Leadership provides. There's some of the things they also talk about is financial fitness, adversity, success, and a balance. It's very important to have a balance. They do not just sign you up and leave you on your own. They help you build the business, and so they deliver on what they say. And so they need you to be successful so you can have influence and be a leader. We need 3 to 5% of the people as leaders so we can work together and affect change towards freedom. And so they have meetings every Tuesday night in the DFW area at the Omni Hotel on 635 east of the George Bush Toll Road. There's other meetings if you're not in the DFW area. You know, you can contact me, and I can let you know where the other meetings are at in your area. And they have, this is my website if you're interested in finding out more. Judgment Day is coming for these Canada Border Services Agency pigs and their judicial whore pig handlers. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing some of them do that little dance they do at the end of a common law rope. There are common law courts springing up all over, and these judicial whores are going to be brought to some real justice, and I'm glad it's not up to me. Upcoming events, Color of Law, Right to Travel has already been published, Corruption in the Courts 4, Fire the Whores in Texas, City of Fort Worth pigs, City of Grand Prairie pigs, and how to do a habeas corpus. Some of my documents can be found at my, copies of these documents can be found at my Yahoo group, Administrating Your Public Servants. I've also got other YouTube videos, so I would encourage you to watch them, and you can send me emails to find out more information. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my little rant today, and I hope you got something out of it and it was beneficial for you. And if you like it, don't forget to like my video. And if you subscribe, then you can you'll get notified when the next one comes out. And I hope you have a real nice day.